When the hackers find someone with admin rights, it's like Christmas for them. In this episode, we look at what you're going to do to protect admin access on your IT systems. Section 7, Part 2, Administrator Accounts. In Part 1, we looked at how you make sure your staff have the right access to do their jobs. This time we're moving on to how we protect our administrator accounts. Protecting our administrator accounts is crucial. The damage done with one of these accounts can be so much greater than with a standard user account. The cyber criminals can often do stuff without us even knowing if they compromise these accounts. There is one key thing you need to be aware of about administrator accounts. Under Cyber Essentials, you must not use an administrator account for day-to-day activities. If you're finding you need to log in as administrator all day, something is wrong. Also remember, this is part 2. Questions 1 to 4 were covered last episode. Question 5. Do you have a process for granting someone admin access? Cyber Essentials states you should have a formal process for granting someone administrative access. This means that process should be written down and followed. It should also include who approves the request. In your answer, you should describe what the process is so that as assessors we can understand and ensure it's appropriate. Working in IT for many years, it's been so common to have someone simply phone up and demand admin rights and give all the reasons under the sun why they need it. Having a process to follow ensures that proper consideration has been given and your security is protected. I find a lot of my clients now don't have any admin rights at all. They simply have a in case of emergency password, but everything else is left to the IT provider. And whilst we're on that subject, your process should also be followed when granting your IT provider admin rights. Question 6. How do you control what your admin accounts are used for? Administrator accounts should only be used for administration tasks. Things like installing software or making configuration changes. How do you ensure those with admin rights only perform those specific administration tasks? What we're looking for as assessors is how you control that. Is it through policy and procedures, or do you have some technical measures in place as well? Question 7. How do you make sure administrators don't access email or browse the web? This is where one of the real dangers is. Letting those with administrator access browse the web or even read their email. Often people don't even realise that's an issue. How are you making sure that does not happen? Again, once I explain to my clients how easy your IT systems can be compromised with one misplaced click, they soon start to understand the dangers. Have you provided training to staff who have administrator access? Or have you just assumed they know what they're doing? There are technical things you can put in place with your firewall and web filters, but often some good policies and a training program is sufficient. Please explain to us how you ensure your admin users know the dangers and don't expose you to being compromised in this way. Question 8. How do you track who's got admin access? If you've got a formal process for granting administrator access, you should also be tracking who that is too. Do you have a formal list of who has administrator access? You should be reviewing this list on a regular basis to ensure it's still relevant, but also if their normal user account gets compromised, you need to check to make sure their admin account wasn't compromised too. I'd expect you to confirm how you track this within the notes field. Remember, however you store that list, it's potentially sensitive and valuable information to an attacker, so you should take appropriate measures to protect it too. Question 9. Do you review who has access? So I touched on this in that last question. You should be reviewing who's got access on a regular basis. How often that is depends on your organisation. For some, annually is enough. For some, monthly is important. I find generally the more people who have admin access, the more often you should be checking. It also depends on how sensitive some of your systems are and your risk profile. It's something easy for your IT provider to add into your review meetings with them. And it takes just a couple of minutes when you've got a well-maintained list. Reviewing who has access is important on 2 levels. First, it checks those who have access should still have it, but second, it checks that no one has been added without your knowledge, without following the proper process. Question 10, have you got multi-factor authentication enabled? One of my favourite things to implement, and it helps so much with your security. A rule in our own business, is you must enable MFA on any system that supports it. And if a system does not support it, then we need to question, do we really need that system? When it comes to administrator accounts, Cyber Essentials says you must enable MFA if it's supported. If you're making use of Microsoft 365 and Microsoft Azure, you can set up MFA for your administrator accounts through that. Think about what other systems you have with administrator users. Have they got MFA on them? And is it enabled? Question 11. If you have not enabled it, is it because MFA is not available? If you've not got MFA enabled on all your systems, you need to list the systems it's not available on. So if MFA is not available, we don't expect you to invest in additional hardware or software, but you should be aware of which systems don't support it, so you can assess this and be aware of what may be at risk. Wow, I feel like we've whizzed through those questions. They are pretty simple questions though. Hopefully I've helped explain them for you. If you've got any questions, please let me know in the comments below or reach out to us. Let's take a look at how we cover this section off with some of my consultancy clients. I'm sure we've talked about your IT security policy in a previous episode. That's a great place to talk about administrator accounts and document the process for granting someone admin access. It's normally laid out as 4 or 5 steps in bullet points within your IT security policy, so it's easy to follow. Part of that process involves updating the register of administrator users. This same policy also talks about how often that register is reviewed and how it's reviewed, who's involved in that process. Sometimes the rules for what you can and can't do as an administrator are in the IT security policy. Sometimes we break that out into a separate administrator guidelines policy, which is then signed by the user prior to granting administrator access. On occasion, I've also seen formal training sessions delivered, educating users on what can and can't be done and the risks involved. Depending on what firewall you've got, it may also be possible to implement some technical controls over whether admin users can get internet access. Your IT provider will be able to advise you about that if you feel it necessary. I've talked about multi-factor authentication above, and all I'll say further is if you've got Microsoft 365, please make sure it's enabled on all your admin accounts and ideally all your user accounts too. It really will help save you from being easily compromised. So that leaves us with just one more section to cover, malware protection. I'll be back next week to cover that off for you, and then we'll follow up with some common questions and final tips. See you then.